Hello, friends. Today I'm going to start by telling you a somewhat sad story. This is about a doctor who lived in Hungary. He was practicing medicine in 1846 at the maternity hospital in Vienna. And this was the start of the golden age of the philosopher, scientist. And doctors were no longer thinking in terms of illness and disease being created by evil spirits or bad air, that sort of thing. They were looking to anatomy to understand what was going on. And so the practice of doing autopsies was very common. Well, this doctor, Dr. Semmelweis, was noticing that there were two maternity wards in the hospital. One was run by all male doctors and medical students, and the other was run by midwives. The ward that was run by the staff of all male doctors and medical students had almost 5 times the number of deaths with mothers and children, newborns. And he was trying to figure this out. And using the scientific method, he was collecting data, he was trying to make sense of the numbers, and he tried all sorts of things. Was it because the mothers were giving birth on their backs instead of their sides? Was it because the priest was coming through after someone had died and ringing the bell and scaring the people? He tried all kinds of things. And then a colleague of his, a pathologist, was performing an autopsy, pricked his finger, and also contracted the same type of fever that was killing the mothers and the babies. They had called it childbed fever. And when Dr. Semmelweis's friend, the pathologist, died of very similar fever, it gave Semmelweis the idea that it was the autopsies that was somehow causing the childbed fever. And he didn't know about germs, he didn't know about viruses, he didn't know about any of this unseen world that now we know about in our age. But he hypothesized that somehow there were little particles that were being transferred from the dead to these vulnerable patients, these new mothers and babies. And so he imposed a restriction and rules on the doctors in the hospitals and said, in his hospital, and said, you have to wash your hands. You have to sterilize with a chlorine solution. You have to prevent this transfer of particles. And when they did this, when they washed their hands and sterilized, the death rate plummeted. It was having a good effect. But the sad part of the story, the especially sad part of the story, is that the doctors resented Semmelweis. And they thought that he was accusing them of killing these patients. And so they fired him, and he ended up going to many hospitals around Europe trying to convince people that this was important to wash your hands and not do this transfer of particles. People didn't listen. And he eventually was committed to an asylum where he was beaten and eventually died of a fever from an infection, very similar to childbed fever. Well, in our age, we consider Semmelweis a pioneer, and he helped the general knowledge to make it what it is today. And no surgeon would go into surgery today without scrubbing and disinfecting and wearing a face mask and all those things. And I tell this story because we are in an age now where we are starting to become aware of energy, and unseen things are becoming more into our awareness. And it's not only things like viruses and germs and electricity that's not really seen by the naked eye. We see the effects of these things, but we don't see the actual thing unless we use microscopes and all that. But we are also needing to increase our awareness of things that are seen but not understood. Swami gives a great example of this because he started traveling by boat when he was 6 months old, so he had a lot of experience with boats. And he would say that for centuries, people out on boats would see another boat approaching, and they wouldn't see just a little speck of the whole boat and then watch as the whole boat got larger as it approached them. But what they would see is first the mast, and then the front of the boat, and then all of the boat as it got closer. And that's an indication that the boat is coming up over the curve of the earth. It's not just a little speck getting larger like on a flat plane. There's a curve. And yet for centuries, people thought the world was flat, despite clearly seeing this example of the curvature of the earth. So now, in this age, we are seeing how the actions of us as the human race is having a terrible effect on the earth. And we need to do everything that we can to increase our awareness, to understand the effects of what we are doing, the effects of filling the ocean with plastic, to see the effect of cutting down the rainforests, and in Wuhan, China, the effect of having wet markets where these animals are stressed and all grouped together in an unnatural way. And the greatest way that we can increase our awareness is by meditating, by strengthening the intuition of our hearts so that we can truly see what is behind the appearances. We need to rely more and more on our intuition and rely more and more on our meditations to keep us centered, to keep our awareness high, and to do the right things. So let us make it a priority to meditate deeply every day and to grow in higher awareness.